Number 5313. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. This signifies that nevertheless this will appear to come from the natural, because from the celestial of the spiritual through the natural, as is manifest from the signification of being greater than another, here namely greater in appearance or to the sight, and from the signification of a throne, here namely the natural. For the natural is meant by a throne, when the celestial of the spiritual is meant by him that sitteth upon it. For the natural is like a throne for the spiritual, here the celestial of the spiritual. In general, that which is lower is like a throne for the higher is and acts therein, and indeed through the lower. And what is done appears as if done by the lower, because, as just said, it is done through it. This is what is meant by Pharaoh saying to Joseph, "Only in the throne will I be greater than thou." A throne is often mentioned in the word where the subject is divine truth and judgment therefrom. And by throne in the internal sense is signified what belongs to the divine royalty, and by him that sitteth upon it, the Lord himself, as king or judge. But the signification of throne, like that of many other things, is according to the application. When the divine itself and the Lord's divine human are meant by him that sitteth on the throne, then the divine truth which proceeds from him is meant by the throne. But when the divine truth that proceeds from the Lord is meant by him that sitteth on the throne, then the universal heaven, filled with divine truth, is meant by the throne. But when the Lord as to the divine truth in the higher heavens is meant by him that sitteth on the throne, then the divine truth in the lowest heaven, and also in the church, is meant by the throne. Thus the significations of throne are relative. A throne signifies that which belongs to divine truth, because truth is signified in the word by a king and also by a kingdom. That truth is signified by a king may be seen above, and by a kingdom see Numbers. But what is specifically meant in the word by a throne is plain from the context, as in Matthew. I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Again, in another place, he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon. Here it is expressly said that heaven is God's throne, and the earth, called his footstool, signifies that which is below heaven, thus the church. That the earth is the church may be seen above. Likewise in Isaiah, thus said Jehovah, the heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. And in David, Jehovah hath made firm his throne in the heavens. In Matthew, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. This refers to the last judgment, and he that sitteth on the throne is called the King. Here the throne of glory in the internal sense is the divine truth that is from the divine good in heaven. He that sitteth on that throne is the Lord, who being the judge from divine truth is here called the King. In Luke, he shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give unto him the throne of his father David. This is said by the angel to Mary. Everyone can see that the throne of David here is not the kingdom of David, or a kingdom on earth, but a kingdom in heaven. And therefore by David is not meant David, but the Lord's divine royalty. And by throne is signified the divine truth that goes forth and makes the Lord's kingdom. In the Revelation, I was in the Spirit, And behold, a throne was set in heaven, and on the throne was one sitting. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper stone and a sardius. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, like an emerald to look upon. And round about the throne were 24 thrones, and upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting. And out of the throne went forth lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was a glassy sea like unto crystal. And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne 4 animals full of eyes before and behind. And when the animals shall give glory and honor and thanks to him that sitteth upon the throne, who liveth for ever and ever, the 24 elders shall fall down before him that sitteth upon the throne, and shall worship him that liveth for ever and ever, and shall cast their crowns before the throne. In these verses is representatively described the throne of the Lord's glory, and thereby the divine truth proceeding from him. But if the signification of these representatives is not known, scarcely anything can be known of the meaning of these prophetic words, and they will be considered devoid of anything more deeply divine than the sense of the letter, in which case the heavenly kingdom will be thought of as if it were an earthly kingdom. And yet by a throne set in heaven is signified the divine truth there, thus heaven as to divine truth, and by him that sat upon the throne is meant the Lord. He appeared like a jasper stone and a sardius, because these stones, as all the precious stones spoken of in the word, signify divine truth, and stones in general the truths of faith. By the rainbow round about the throne are signified truths transparent from good, and this because colors in the other life are from the light of heaven, and the light of heaven is divine truth. In regard to rainbows in the other life, see what is said above, and also in regard to colors. The 24 thrones round about the throne signify all things of truth in the aggregate, the same as is signified by 12. That 12 denotes all things of truth in the aggregate may be seen above. The lightnings, thunderings, and voices that proceeded out of the throne signify the terrors caused by the divine truth with those who are not in good. The 7 lamps of fire burning are affections of truth from good, which do hurt to those who are not in good, and therefore are called the 7 spirits of God who do hurt, as is plain from the following verses. The glassy sea before the throne is all truth in the natural, thus knowledges and external knowledges. That these things are the sea may be seen above. The 4 animals in the midst of the throne and round about the throne, full of eyes before and behind, are things of the understanding from the divine in the heavens. 4 signifying their conjunction with the things of the will. For truths are of the intellectual part, and goods are of the will part. Whence it is said that they were full of eyes before and behind, because eyes signify things of the understanding, and hence in a higher sense the things of faith. That 4 denotes conjunction, the same as 2, may be seen above. The holiness of the divine truth proceeding from the Lord is described in the rest of the passage. As by the 24 thrones and the 24 elders are signified all things of truth or all things of faith in the aggregate, and the like by 12, it is evident that all things of truth, from which and according to which judgment is effected, are what is meant in the internal sense by the 12 thrones on which the 12 apostles were to sit, of which we read thus in Matthew. Jesus said to the disciples, Verily I say unto you, that ye who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit upon the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And in Luke, I appoint unto you a kingdom, as the Father hath appointed unto me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That the 12 apostles denote all things of truth may be seen above, and also the 12 sons of Jacob, and hence the 12 tribes of Israel, and that the apostles cannot judge anybody. Likewise in the Revelation, I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. Here also thrones signify all things of truth, from which and according to which judgment is effected. The same is also meant by the angels with whom the Lord is to come to judgment. That by angels in the word something in the Lord is signified may be seen above. In this instance they signify truths from the divine, which truths in the word are also called judgments. In very many other places also a throne is attributed to Jehovah or the Lord, and this because there is in a throne what is representative of a kingdom. When there is discourse in a higher heaven about divine truth and judgment, a throne appears in the ultimate heaven. This is the reason why a throne is representative, and is so often spoken of in the prophetic word, and why from the most ancient times a throne became one of the insignia of a king, and therefore signifies royalty, as in the following passages. In Moses built an altar, and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi, and he said, Because a hand is against the throne of Yah, there shall be the war of Jehovah against Amalek from generation to generation. What is meant by a hand against the throne of Yah, and by the war of Jehovah against Amalek from generation to generation, no one can know except from the internal sense, that is, unless he knows what is meant by a throne and what by Amalek. By Amalek in the word are signified the falsities that assail truths, and by a throne the divine truth itself that is assailed. In David, Jehovah, thou hast maintained my judgment and my cause. Thou hast sat upon the throne, the judge of justice. Jehovah shall abide to eternity. He hath prepared his throne for judgment. Again, thy throne, O God, is forever and to eternity. A scepter of equity is the scepter of thy kingdom. Again, clouds and thick darkness are round about him. Justice and judgment are the support of his throne. In Jeremiah, in that time they shall call Jerusalem the throne of Jehovah, and all the nations shall be gathered unto it. Jerusalem denotes the Lord's spiritual kingdom. This kingdom is meant also by the New Jerusalem in Ezekiel, and by the Holy Jerusalem coming down from heaven in the Revelation. The Lord's spiritual kingdom is where the leading principle is divine truth, in which is good, and the celestial kingdom is where the leading principle is divine good, from which is divine truth. And this shows why Jerusalem is called the throne of Jehovah, and why it is said in David, In Jerusalem are set thrones for judgment. But Zion is called the throne of the glory of Jehovah in Jeremiah. Hast thou utterly renounced Judah? Hath thy soul loathed Zion? Despise it not for thy name's sake, defile not the throne of thy glory. Whereby Zion is meant the Lord's celestial kingdom. The manner in which the Lord in respect to judgment is represented in heaven, where things occasionally related in the prophets are rendered visible, is seen in Daniel. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like clean wool. His throne was a flame of fire, and the wheels thereof burning fire. A stream of fire issued and went forth before him. 1,000 thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Such things are constantly seen in heaven, all being representative, and they appear from the discourse of the angels in the higher heavens, which on descending presents such objects to view. Angelic spirits to whom perception is given by the Lord know what these things signify, as for instance the Ancient of Days, the garment white as snow, the hair like clean wool, the throne like a flame of fire, the wheels a burning fire, the stream of fire issuing from him. By the flame of fire and the stream of fire is there represented the good of divine love. So in Ezekiel, above the expanse that was over the head of the cherubim was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of the throne was a likeness as the appearance of a man upon it above. And also in the first book of Kings, I saw, said Micaiah the prophet, Jehovah sitting on his throne, and all the host of the heavens standing by him on his right hand and on his left. Anyone not aware of what these terms represent and therefore signify must believe that the Lord has a throne like kings on earth, and that there are such things as are here mentioned. Yet there are not such things in the heavens, but they are so presented to the view of those in the ultimate heaven, and in them, as in pictures, they see divine mysteries. The Lord's royalty, by which is signified the divine truth proceeding from him, was represented also by the throne constructed by Solomon, which is thus described in the first book of Kings. Solomon made a great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the finest gold. There were 6 steps to the throne, and the top of the throne was round behind. And there were hands on either side by the place of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the hands, and 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other, upon the 6 steps. Thus was represented the throne of glory, the lions being divine truths fighting and conquering, and the 12 lions all these truths in the aggregate. As almost all the things in the Word have also an opposite sense, so too has a throne, and in this sense it signifies the kingdom of falsity, as in the Revelation. To the angel of the church in Pergamos, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's throne is. In the same, the dragon gave the beast that came up out of the sea his power and his throne and great authority. Again, the 5th angel poured out his vial upon the throne of the beast, and his kingdom was darkened. And in Isaiah, Thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into the heavens, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. This is said of Babylon. Number 5314, verses 41 to 44. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a necklace of gold upon his neck. And he made him ride in the 2nd chariot that he had. And they cried before him, Abrek. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, signifies the further perception of the natural from the celestial of the spiritual. See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt, signifies dominion over both naturals. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, signifies a confirming of the power the natural previously had. And put it upon Joseph's hand, signifies that the natural yielded all the power to the celestial of the spiritual. And clothed him in garments of fine linen, indicates an external significative of the celestial of the spiritual. Garments of fine linen are truths from the divine. And put a necklace of gold upon his neck, indicates a significative of the conjunction of interior things with exterior, effected by good. And he made him ride in the second chariot, indicates a significative that from this comes all the doctrine of good and truth. That he had signifies that comes by means of the natural. And they cried before him, Abrek, signifies acknowledgment through faith and adoration. And he set him over all the land of Egypt, signifies that such was its authority. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, signifies still further perception. I am Pharaoh, signifies that the natural is thence derived. And without thee shall no man lift up his hand, signifies that from the celestial of the spiritual is all power in the spiritual. Or his foot, signifies and all power in the natural. In all the land of Egypt, signifies in both naturals. Number 5315. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph. This signifies the further perception of the natural from the celestial of the spiritual, as is evident from the signification of saying in the historical parts of the word, namely perceiving, as often shown above, and from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the natural, and of Joseph, namely the celestial of the spiritual, see also above. The reason why it is the perception of the natural from the celestial of the spiritual that is signified is that the natural has all its perception from what is higher than itself, here from the celestial of the spiritual, which is higher. Number 5316. See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. This signifies dominion over both naturals, as is evident from the signification of setting any one over, namely dominion, and from the signification of all the land of Egypt, namely both naturals. This treats still further of the dominion that Pharaoh gave Joseph over the land of Egypt, namely that Pharaoh deprived himself of his own authority, and put all Egypt under Joseph. These things were so done of the divine providence, in order that Joseph might assume the representation of the celestial of the spiritual the Lord had when he was in the world, and by means of which he disposed his natural and also his sensuous, in order that he might gradually make them both divine. This was done to Joseph, so that the word to be written about him might contain divine things, that is, such things as in the heavens are most holy and are suited to the angels in the heavens. For the angels there are in the Lord, because they are in the sphere of the divine truth proceeding from him. And therefore the divine things in the word's internal sense, relative to the Lord and to the glorification of his human, so greatly affect them that they perceive thence all the blessedness of their wisdom and intelligence. Number 5317. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand. This signifies a confirming of the power the natural previously had, as is evident from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the natural, see above, and from the signification of a ring, namely that which confirms, see below, and from the signification of the hand, namely power. From this it is plain that by his taking off his ring from his hand, is signified that the natural gave up the power it had before, and that by his putting it upon Joseph's hand, as below, is signified that the natural yielded all the power to the celestial of the spiritual. That a ring upon the hand denotes confirmation of power cannot be so well established from parallel passages in the Word, because rings upon the hand are nowhere else mentioned, save only in Luke, where the father of the son who had wasted all his substance said to the servants, "Bring forth the chief robe, and put it on him, and put a ring upon his hand, and shoes upon his feet." Here also a ring signifies confirmation of his power as a son in the household, just as above. Nevertheless, this signification of a ring upon the hand is evident from the rites that have come down to us from ancient times, such as those of betrothals and weddings, and also of inaugurations, in which rings are put upon the hand, and by them is signified confirmation of power. Moreover, signets, which also were worn on the hand, signify consent and confirmation. Number 5318. And put it upon Joseph's hand. This signifies that the natural yielded all the power to the celestial of the spiritual, as is evident from the signification of putting a ring upon another's hand, namely a confirmation that one yields to him the power that he himself has, and from the representation of Joseph, namely the celestial of the spiritual, as often shown above. Number 5319. And clothed him in garments of fine linen. This indicates an external significative of the celestial of the spiritual, and garments of fine linen denote truths from the divine, as is manifest from the signification of garments, namely truths. Garments of fine linen are truths from the divine, because a garment made of fine linen was of purest white and lustrous, and truth from the divine is represented by garments of such whiteness and luster. The reason is that the shining whiteness and luster of heaven is from the light that comes from the Lord, and this light is the divine truth itself. And therefore when the Lord was transfigured before Peter, James, and John, his garments appeared as the light, shining exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can whiten them, and glistening. It was the divine truth itself from the Lord's divine human that was thus represented. Yet it is exterior truths that are represented by the white radiance of garments in the heavens, and interior truths by the brightness and resplendence of the face. Hence it is that to be clothed in garments of fine linen is here an external significative, namely of the truth proceeding from the celestial of the spiritual. For it was in this that the divine of the Lord then was. Fine linen and garments of fine linen in other parts of the word also signify truth from the divine, as in Ezekiel. I clothed thee with broidered work, and shod thee with sealskin, and I girded thee with fine linen, and covered thee with silk. Thus wast thou decked with gold and silver, and thy garments were of fine linen and silk and broidered work. This is said of Jerusalem, by which in these verses is meant the ancient church. The truths of that church are described by garments of broidered work, fine linen and silk, and by being decked with gold and silver. By broidered work are signified truths that are a matter of external knowledge, by fine linen natural truths, and by silk spiritual truths. Again, of fine linen embroidered work from Egypt was thy sail, that it might be to thee for an ensign. Blue and crimson from the isles of Elisha was thy covering. This is said of Tyre, by which also is meant the ancient church, but as to knowledges of good and truth. and by fine linen embroidered work from Egypt, of which was her sale, is signified truth from external knowledges, as a sign or external significative of that church. In the Revelation, the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over Babylon, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. Merchandise of gold and silver and precious stone and pearl and fine linen and crimson and silk, and every vessel of ivory, and every vessel of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble. In this passage each and all of the expressions signify the things of the church, thus of truth and good. But here in the opposite sense, because spoken of Babylon. Every one can see that such things would never have been enumerated in the word which came down from heaven, unless there was something heavenly in each one. For why should mention be made of worldly wares in treating of Babylon, by which is signified the profane church? Again in the same. Woe, woe, the great city! She that was clothed in fine linen and crimson and scarlet, and gilded with gold and precious stone and pearls. That every detail here signifies some heavenly divine thing is obvious in the same book, where it is said of fine linen that it is the righteousness of the saints. The time of the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. Then to her was granted that she should be clothed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. Fine linen is the righteousness of the saints, because all who are in truth from the divine put on the Lord's righteousness, for their garments are white and shining from the light that comes from the Lord, and therefore truth itself is represented in heaven by what is shining white. It is for this reason also that they who are taken up into heaven out of a state of vastation appear clad in shining white, because they then put off that which is of their own righteousness, and put on that which is of the Lord's righteousness. In order that truth from the divine might be represented in the Jewish church, it was commanded that the garments of Aaron and also the curtains about the ark should be of fine linen, as we read in Moses. For Aaron thou shalt weave the tunic in checker work of fine linen, and thou shalt make a mitre of fine linen. They made the tunics of fine linen the work of the weaver for Aaron and for his sons. Thou shalt make the tabernacle with 10 curtains, of fine twined linen and blue and crimson and scarlet double dyed. Thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle. There shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen. The veil for the gate of the court was the work of the embroiderer, of blue and crimson and scarlet double dyed, and fine twined linen. Fine linen was to be used because everything in the ark and about it, and also everything in Aaron's garments, was representative of spiritual and celestial things. This shows that the word is but little understood, unless it is known what such things represent, and that it is scarcely understood at all when it is believed to contain no other holiness than that which appears in the letter. That angels who are in truth from the divine appear clothed as in fine linen, that is, in what is white and shining, appears from the revelation in connection with the white horse. He that sat upon the white horse was clothed in a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word. His armies in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. From all this it is very evident that fine linen is an outward thing significative of truth from the divine. For he that sat upon the white horse is the Lord as to the Word, as is there openly said, and the Word is truth itself from the divine. That the white horse is the internal sense of the word may be seen above. Hence white horses are truths from the divine, For all things of the internal sense of the word are truths from the divine, and therefore his armies were seen upon white horses, and were clothed in fine linen, white and clean. Number 5320. And put a necklace of gold upon his neck. This is a significative of the conjunction of interior things with exterior affected by good, as is evident from the signification of the neck, namely influx and also the communication of higher things with lower things, or what is the same, of interior things with exterior. Hence a necklace, because it encircles the neck, is a significative of the conjunction of these things. A necklace of gold signifies conjunction through good, or affected by good, because gold signifies good. A sign of the conjunction of interior with exterior truth is signified by a necklace upon the throat in Ezekiel. I decked thee with ornament, and I put bracelets upon thy hands, and a necklace upon thy throat. Number 5321. And he made him ride in the second chariot. This is a sign that from him comes all the doctrine of good and truth, as is evident from the signification of a chariot, namely the doctrine of good and truth, see below. Hence his making him ride in a chariot is a sign that this doctrine comes therefrom. These words refer to what was previously said by Pharaoh, Thou shalt be over my house, and thy mouth shall all my people kiss. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. The doctrine of good and truth coming from him is signified, because Joseph represents the Lord as to the divine spiritual, thus as to the divine truth from the Lord's divine human, from which divine truth is the celestial of the spiritual. Everything of the doctrine of good and truth is from this source, because the Lord is doctrine itself, for all doctrine proceeds from him, and all doctrine treats of him, for all doctrine treats of the good of love and of the truth of faith. These are from the Lord, and therefore the Lord is not only in them, but also is both. From this it is evident that the doctrine that treats of good and truth treats of the Lord only, and that it proceeds from his divine human. From the divine itself no doctrine can possibly proceed except through the divine human, that is, through the Word, which in the supreme sense is the divine truth from the Lord's divine human. Not even the angels in the inmost heaven can understand what proceeds immediately from the divine itself, because it is infinite, and therefore transcends all apprehension, even that of angels. But what proceeds from the Lord's divine human they can apprehend, because it treats of God as divine man, concerning whom some idea can be formed from the human. And any idea whatever formed about the human is acceptable, provided it flows from the good of innocence, and is in the good of charity. This is what is meant by the Lord's words in John. No man hath seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. In the same, Ye have neither heard the Father's voice at any time, nor seen his shape. And in Matthew, No one knoweth the Father, save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son willeth to reveal him. Chariots are very frequently mentioned in the Word, but hardly anyone knows that they signify doctrinals of good and truth, and also the external knowledges belonging to doctrinals. The reason is that when a chariot is mentioned, nothing spiritual enters the idea, but only the natural historical. And it is the same with the horses of the chariot. And yet horses in the word signify things of the understanding, and therefore a chariot signifies doctrinals and the external knowledges belonging thereto. That chariots denote the doctrinals of the Church and also external knowledges has been evident to me from the chariot so often seen in the other life. There is also a place to the right near the lower earth where chariots and horses appear, with stables set in order, and where men are seen walking and conversing, who in the world have been learned, and have regarded life as the end of learning. Such things appear to them from the angels in the higher heavens. For when these are discoursing about things of the understanding, of doctrine, and of knowledge, such objects appear to spirits below. That such things are signified by chariots and horses is very obvious from the fact that Elijah appeared to be carried into heaven by a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and that he and also Elisha were called the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof, as we read in the 2nd book of Kings. Behold, a chariot of fire and horses of fire came between them, and Elijah went up in a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And regarding Elisha in the same book, when Elisha was fallen sick of his sickness whereof he died, Joash the king of Israel came down unto him, and wept before his face, and said, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. The reason why they were so called is that both Elijah and Elisha represented the Lord as to the Word. The Word itself is chiefly the doctrine of good and truth, for from it is all doctrine. It was for the same reason that to the boy whose eyes Jehovah opened, the mountain appeared full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. That a chariot signifies what is doctrinal, and a horse what is intellectual, is evident also from other passages in the Word, as in Ezekiel. Ye shall be filled at my table with horse and chariot, with mighty man and every man of war. So will I set my glory among the nations. Here the coming of the Lord is treated of. That by horse and chariot here are not signified horse and chariot is plain to everyone, for they were not to be filled at the Lord's table with these, but with such things as are signified by horse and chariot, namely the things of the understanding and of the doctrine of good and truth. Similar things are signified by horses and chariots in the following passages. In David, the chariots of God are 20,000, thousands of peaceful ones. The Lord is in them, Sinai in the sanctuary. Again, Jehovah covereth himself with light as with a garment. He stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain. He layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters. He maketh the clouds his chariots. He walketh upon the wings of the wind. In Isaiah, the prophecy of the wilderness of the sea. Thus hath the Lord said unto me, set a watchman to watch, he will declare. So he saw a chariot, a pair of horsemen, a chariot of an ass, a chariot of a camel, and he hearkened a hearkening, a great hearkening. For a lion cried upon the watchtower, Lord, I stand continually in the daytime, and upon my ward I am set all the nights. Then in the very deed, lo, a chariot of a man, a pair of horsemen, and he said, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. In the same, then will they bring all your brethren in all nations an offering to Jehovah, upon horses and upon chariot and upon litters and upon mules and by couriers, to the mountain of my holiness Jerusalem. Again, behold, Jehovah will come in fire, and his chariots shall be like the whirlwind. In Habakkuk, was Jehovah enraged with the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea, that thou didst ride upon thy horses? Thy chariots are salvation. In Zechariah, I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. In the first chariot were red horses, in the second chariot black horses, in the third chariot white horses, and in the fourth chariot grizzled horses. Also in Jeremiah, there shall enter in by the gates of this city kings and princes sitting upon the throne of David, riding in the chariot and on horses, they and their princes, the man of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And this city shall be inhabited forever. The city that shall be inhabited forever is not Jerusalem, but the Lord's church, signified by Jerusalem. The kings who shall enter in by the gates of that city are not kings, but the truths of the church. Thus princes are not princes, but the first principles of truth. They who sit upon the throne of David are divine truths that proceed from the Lord. They who ride in chariot and on horses are the derivative things of understanding and of doctrine. Chariots are frequently mentioned also in the histories of the Word. And because these histories are all representative, and the expressions signify the things of the Lord's kingdom and of the church, chariots therein also have a similar meaning. As most of the expressions in the Word have also an opposite sense, so have chariots, and in this sense they signify doctrinals of evil and falsity, and also the external knowledges that confirm them, as in these passages. Woe unto them that go down into Egypt for help, and depend upon horse, and trust upon chariot, because they are many, and upon horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel. Again, by the hand of thy servants thou hast blasphemed the Lord, and hast said, By the multitude of my chariots am I come to the height of the mountains, the sides of Lebanon, where I will cut off the loftiness of its cedars, the choice of its fir trees. A prophetic reply to the haughty words of Rabshakeh, the general of the king of Assyria. In Jeremiah, Behold waters coming up from the north, that shall become an overflowing stream, and shall overflow the land and the fullness thereof, the city and them that dwell therein. And all the inhabitants of the land shall howl at the noise of the stamping of the hoofs of his strong horses, at the tumult of his chariot, at the rumbling of his wheels. In Ezekiel, By reason of the abundance of his horses, their dust shall cover thee. Thy walls shall shake by reason of the voice of the horseman and of the wheel and of the chariot, when he shall come into thy gates, beside the entrances of a city wherein is made a breach. By the hoofs of his horses shall he tread down all thy streets. In Haggai, I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms, and I will destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations. I will also overthrow the chariot and those that ride in it, and the horses and their riders shall come down. In Zechariah, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem. I will cut off the battle bow, and he shall speak peace unto the nations. In Jeremiah, Egypt riseth up like a stream, and his waters toss themselves like the streams. For he said, I will go up, I will cover the earth, I will destroy the city and the inhabitants therein. Go up, ye horses, rage, ye chariots. By the horses and chariots with which the Egyptians pursued the sons of Israel, and with which Pharaoh entered the sea Suph, where the wheels of the chariots were taken off, and by other things said of the horses and chariots, which compose the larger part of that description, are signified the things of understanding, of doctrine, and of false external knowledge, together with the reasonings founded on them, that pervert and extinguish the truths of the Church. The destruction and death of such things is there described. Number 5322. That he had. This signifies that comes by means of the natural, namely the doctrine of good and truth, as is evident from the context and the internal sense, and also from what has been explained above. Number 5323. And they cried before him, Abrek. This signifies acknowledgement through faith and adoration, as is evident from the signification of crying, namely acknowledgement through faith, see below, and from the signification of abrek, namely adoration. For in the original language, abrek means bend the knees, and the bending of the knees is adoration. For all inward endeavors that are of the will, thus of the love or affection, consequently of the life, have outward acts or gestures corresponding to them, which acts or gestures flow from the very correspondence of outward with inward things. Holy fear, with its consequent humiliation and therefore adoration, has acts or gestures corresponding to itself, namely bending the knees, falling down upon the knees, and also prostrating the body to the earth. In this state, if the adoration is from genuine humiliation, or if the humiliation is from genuine holy fear, there is a failing of the spirit, and hence a giving way of the joints in the border or intermediate region where the spiritual is conjoined with the natural, that is, where the knees are. For the parts below have correspondence with natural things, and those above with spiritual things. Hence it is that the bending of the knees is a sign of adoration. With celestial men this act is spontaneous, but with spiritual men it is deliberate. When the kings of old rode in a chariot, men bent the knees, because kings represented the Lord as to divine truth, and a chariot signified the Word. The rite of this adoration began when its representation was known, and at that time kings did not ascribe the adoration to themselves, but to the royalty distinct from themselves, although vested in them. With them the royalty was the law, which being from divine truth was to be adored in the king in so far as he was its custodian. Thus the king ascribed none of the royalty to himself beyond the custody of the law, and in so far as he receded from this, so far he receded from royalty, knowing that adoration on any other ground than the law, that is, any other adoration than of the law in itself, would be idolatry. That the royalty is divine truth may be seen above. Consequently, the royalty is the law, which in itself is the truth of a kingdom according to which its inhabitants are to live. From what has been said, it is now evident that abrek, or bend the knees, signifies adoration. As a cry also is an act that corresponds to a living confession or acknowledgement from faith, the rite of crying out was observed among the ancients when this confession was to be signified, and for this reason crying or shouting is frequently mentioned in the word in connection with confession and acknowledgement from faith, as where it is said of John the Baptist, John bare witness of Jesus and cried, saying, This was he of whom I said, He that cometh after me was before me, for he was prior to me. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, Make straight the way of the Lord. In the same, they took branches of the palm trees and went to meet Jesus and cried, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. And in Luke, Jesus said to the Pharisees, If these should be silent, the stones would cry out. As crying signified acknowledgement from faith, and hence reception from this acknowledgement, we therefore sometimes read of the Lord that he cried out, as in John, see Numbers, and also in Isaiah. Jehovah shall go forth as a hero, he shall stir up zeal like a man of wars, he shall shout, yea, he shall cry out. That in the opposite sense by crying is meant non-acknowledgement, thus aversion, may be seen above, and that it is predicated of falsity, see Number. Number 5324. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. This signifies that such was its authority, as is evident from the signification of setting him over all the land of Egypt, namely, dominion over both naturals. But here that the dominion is such as has been described above, thus that such was its authority. Number 5325. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph. This signifies still further perception, as is evident from the signification of saying, from the representation of Pharaoh, and from the representation of Joseph, namely the perception of the natural from the celestial of the spiritual. Here further perception, because the words are repeated. Number 5326. I am Pharaoh. This signifies that the natural is thence derived, as is evident from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the natural. That by I am Pharaoh is signified that the natural is thence derived, is plain from the words just below. Without thee shall no man lift up his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt, by which is signified that all power in both naturals is from that source. And because things in the natural are meant by the words that follow, it is therefore first said, I am Pharaoh. By the natural being thence derived is meant that the natural is from the celestial of the spiritual. In regard to this, the natural in the man who is being created anew, that is, who is being regenerated, is entirely different from what it is in the man who is not being regenerated. The natural in the man who is not being regenerated is everything. From it the man thinks and desires, and not from the rational, still less from the spiritual, because these are closed and, for the most part, extinct. But in the man who is being regenerated, the spiritual becomes everything, and not only disposes the natural to think and desire, but also determines its character, just as the cause determines the character of the effect. For in every effect the only thing that acts is the cause. Thus the natural becomes as the spiritual. For the natural things in the natural, such as the external knowledges that derive somewhat from the natural world, do nothing from themselves. They merely agree that the spiritual should act in and by the natural, thus naturally. Just as in the effect, in which there are more things than in the cause, but only such as enable the cause to perform the effect itself in the effect, and to produce itself in act in that degree. From these few remarks it may be seen how it is with the natural in the man who has been created anew, that is, regenerated. This is what is meant by the natural being thence derived, which is signified by I am Pharaoh. Number 5327. And without thee shall no man lift up his hand. This signifies that from the celestial of the spiritual is all power in the spiritual, as is evident from the signification of the hand, namely power. Hence, no man lifting up his hand without thee means that they have no power except from this alone, and therefore that this, namely the celestial of the spiritual, has all power. That power in the spiritual is signified by the hand will be seen in what now follows. Number 5328. Or his foot. This signifies that thence too is all power in the natural. as is evident from the signification of the foot, namely the natural. Here power in the natural, because by lifting up the foot, as by lifting up the hand, is signified power. But by lifting up the hand, power in the spiritual, and by lifting up the foot, power in the natural. For the parts of the body above the feet bear relation to spiritual things. This is very evident from the grand man, or three heavens. When the whole heaven is seen as one man, the inmost or third heaven relates to the head, the middle or second heaven to the body, and the lowest or first to the feet. The inmost or third heaven relates to the head because it is celestial, and the middle or second relates to the body because it is spiritual, and the lowest or first relates to the feet because it is natural. Therefore the neck, being intermediate, signifies the influx and communication of what is celestial with what is spiritual. And the knees, being also intermediate, signify the influx and communication of what is spiritual with what is natural. From this it is plain that by lifting up the hand is signified power in the spiritual, and by lifting up the foot power in the natural. And therefore the power signified by the hand is predicated of the spiritual, namely of truth from good. By the spiritual is meant that in the natural which is of the light of heaven, and by the natural that in the natural which is of the light of the world. For all the former is called spiritual, and all the latter natural. Number 5329. In all the land of Egypt. This signifies in both naturals, as is evident from the signification of all the land of Egypt as being both naturals. Such then are the things the angels perceive when the man reads that Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a necklace of gold upon his neck, and made him ride in the second chariot he had, and they cried before him Abrek, and he set him over all the land of Egypt. For the angels cannot possibly perceive the historical details themselves, because they are things of the world and not of heaven, and the things of the world are invisible to them. Yet because there is a correspondence of all things in the world with those in heaven, the angels perceive heavenly things when man perceives worldly ones. Unless this were so, no angel from heaven could possibly be with man. But in order that angels may be with man, the word has been given, in which the angels perceive a divine holiness that they can communicate to the man with whom they are present. Number 5330, verse 45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, for a wife. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, signifies the character of the celestial of the spiritual at that time. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, for a wife, signifies the character of the marriage of truth with good and of good with truth. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt, signifies when both naturals were its own. Number 5331. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah. This signifies the character of the celestial of the spiritual at that time, as is evident from the signification of a name and of calling a name as being the character. In the original language, Zaphnath-Paaneah means a revealer of hidden things and an opener of things to come, by which in the celestial sense is signified the divine therein. For to reveal hidden things and to open things to come is of God alone. This is the character involved in this name. and it is also the character of the celestial of the spiritual. For the celestial of the spiritual is the good of truth, in which is the divine, or which is immediately from the divine. This, namely the celestial of the spiritual, in which is the divine, belonged to the Lord alone when he was in the world, and was the human in which the divine itself could be, and which could be put off when the Lord made all the human in himself divine. Number 5332. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, for a wife. This signifies the character of the marriage of truth with good and of good with truth, as is evident from the signification of giving for a wife, namely marriage. It is the marriage of good with truth and of truth with good, because nothing else is meant in the spiritual sense by marriages, and hence nothing else is meant by them in the word. By the daughter of the priest of On is signified the truth of good, for a daughter is the affection of truth, and a priest is good. But Joseph is the good of truth, in which is the divine, which is the same as the celestial of the spiritual. From this it is plain that the marriage of truth with good and of good with truth is signified. It is the character of this marriage that is signified. But this character cannot be further set forth, because the character the Lord had in the world cannot be comprehended even by angels, and only some shadowy idea can be formed of it from such things as are in heaven, as from the grand man, and from the celestial of the spiritual which is therein from the influx of the Lord's divine. But still this idea is as dense shade compared with light itself, for it is most general, and relatively, therefore, is scarcely anything. Number 5333. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. This signifies when both naturals were its own, as is evident from the signification of going out, as here being to flow in, and from the signification of the land of Egypt, namely the natural mind, see above, thus both naturals. And because to go out signifies to flow in, and the land of Egypt signifies both naturals, these words together with the preceding signify the character of the celestial of the spiritual, and the character of the marriage of good with truth and of truth with good, when the celestial of the spiritual by influx made both naturals its own. What is meant by making the natural its own may be seen just above. Number 5334, verses 46 to 49. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from before Pharaoh, and passed over into all the land of Egypt. And the earth brought forth gatherings in the 7 years of plenty. And he gathered together all the food of the 7 years that were in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities, the food of the field of the city, which was round about it, put he in the midst thereof. And Joseph heaped up corn as the sand of the sea, exceeding much, until he ceased to number, because it was without number. And Joseph was 30 years old, signifies a full state of remains. When he stood before Pharaoh king of Egypt, signifies when its presence was in the natural. And Joseph went out from before Pharaoh, signifies when the natural in general belonged to the celestial of the spiritual. And passed over into all the land of Egypt, signifies when it made everything therein subordinate and submissive. And the earth made gatherings in the 7 years of plenty, signifies the first states when truths are multiplied in series. And he gathered together all the food of the 7 years, signifies the preservation of truth adjoined to good multiplied during the first times. That were in the land of Egypt signifies in the natural. And put the food in the cities, signifies that it stored up in the interiors. The food of the field of the city signifies things that belong and are suitable to them, which was round about it he put in the midst thereof, signifies the things previously in the exterior natural it stored up in the interiors of the interior natural. And Joseph heaped up corn as the sand of the sea exceeding much, signifies the multiplying of truth from good, until he ceased to number, because it was without number, signifies such as had in it the celestial from the divine. Number 5335. And Joseph was 30 years old. This signifies a full state of remains, as is evident from the signification of 30, namely, full of remains, see below, and from the signification of years, namely, states. The number 30 in the word signifies somewhat of combat, and it also signifies full of remains. The reason why it has this twofold signification is that it is composed of 5 and 6 multiplied together, and also of 3 and 10 so multiplied. From 5 multiplied by 6 it signifies somewhat of combat, because 5 signifies somewhat and 6 combat. But from 3 multiplied by 10 it signifies full of remains, because 3 signifies what is full and 10 remains. For a compound number involves almost the same as its components. Remains are the truths joined to good stored up by the Lord in man's interiors. Fullness of remains is signified also by 30, by 60, and by 100 in Mark. The seed that fell into the good ground yielded fruit that sprang up and increased, and brought forth 130, and another 60, and another 100. As all these numbers arise from 10 by multiplication, they signify a fullness of remains. And as man cannot be regenerated, that is, admitted to the spiritual combats by which regeneration is effected, until he has received remains to the full, it was ordained that the Levites should not do any work in the tabernacle of the congregation until they had completed 30 years, which work or function is also called warfare, as we read in Moses. Take the sum of the sons of Kohath from the midst of the sons of Levi, from 30 years old and upwards to 50 years, every one that cometh to the warfare, to do the work in the tabernacle of the congregation. Something similar is said of the sons of Gershon and of the sons of Merari. The same is meant by David's being 30 years old when he began to reign. From all this it is now plain why the Lord did not manifest himself until he was 30 years of age, for he was then in the fullness of remains. But the remains the Lord had he himself procured for himself, and they were of the divine. And by means of them he united the human essence to the divine essence, and made the human essence divine. From him then it is that 30 years signify a full state as to remains, and that the priests, the Levites, entered upon their functions when they were 30 years old, and that David, because he was to represent the Lord as to royalty, did not begin to reign until he was 30. For every representative is derived from the Lord, and therefore every representative has respect to the Lord. Number 5336. When he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. This signifies when its presence was in the natural, as is evident from the signification of standing before anyone, namely, presence, and from the representation of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, namely, a new state of the natural, or a new natural man. Thus the natural in which the celestial of the spiritual now was, and which the celestial of the spiritual now made its own, as is also signified by the words immediately following, and Joseph went out from before Pharaoh. Number 5337. And Joseph went out from before Pharaoh. This signifies when the natural in general belong to the celestial of the spiritual, as is evident from the signification of going out, namely, belonging thereto, see below, and from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial of the spiritual, and of Pharaoh, namely, the natural, see above. That to go out is to belong thereto, or to be its own, is plain from what precedes and what follows, and also from the spiritual sense of this expression. For to go out or proceed, in the spiritual sense, is to present oneself before another in a form accommodated to him, thus the same, but in a different form. In this sense, going out is said of the Lord in John. Jesus said about himself, I came forth and am come from God. The Father loveth you because ye have loved me, and have believed that I went out from God. I came forth from the Father, and am come into the world. Again I leave the world, and go to the Father. His disciples said, We believe that thou camest forth from God. They knew of a truth that I came out from God. To illustrate what is meant by coming forth or proceeding, let us take the following examples. Truth is said to come forth or proceed from good, when truth is the form of good, or when truth is good in a form that the understanding can apprehend. The understanding also may be said to come forth or proceed from the will, when the understanding is the will formed, or when it is the will in a form perceptible to the internal sight. So in regard to the thought of the understanding, this may be said to come forth or proceed when it becomes speech, and of the will that it comes forth when it becomes action. Thought clothes itself with another form when it becomes speech, but still it is the thought that so comes forth or proceeds. For the words and tones with which it is clothed are mere additions that cause the thought to be appropriately perceived. In like manner the will assumes another form when it becomes action, but still it is the will that is presented in such a form. The accompanying gestures and movements are merely additions that cause the will to appear to and affect the beholder appropriately. So also it may be said of the external man, that it comes forth or proceeds from the internal man, nay, that it does so substantially, because the external man is nothing else than the internal man so formed that it may act suitably in the world in which it is. All this shows what to come forth or proceed is in the spiritual sense, namely that when predicated of the Lord it is the divine formed as a man, and thereby accommodated to the perception of those who believe. Nevertheless, both of these are one. Number 5338. And passed over into all the land of Egypt. This signifies when it made everything therein, namely in the natural, subordinate and submissive, as is evident from the signification of all the land of Egypt, namely both naturals. From this it follows that to pass over into all that land is to make everything in the natural subordinate and submissive.